Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our very first stage dive. For the last 33 years, multimedia has been creating meaningful connections between brands and people. And we decided to start hosting these masterclasses last year. It was an opportunity for us to give back things that we've learned and enable people to create better events. But they weren't fun. I did not enjoy it. So we decided, no, let's change it up a bit. Let's focus on creating that meaningful connection and have conversations. We want to learn from you, and hopefully you can learn something from us. So what is today's focus all about? This very first stage dive. We want to look at data-driven presentations and how we can enable people, our speakers, our team to deliver better presentations so that people don't fall asleep. So my first question is, who is to blame for boring presentations? It's easy for us to blame our CFOs. It's easy for us to blame the various different speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, the individual who is responsible is you. If meaningful connections are created through shared experiences, and it's our responsibility as event planner to create those experiences, isn't the speakers our responsibility? What they say, how they approach delivery on stage? We need to take responsibility for the experience that's being created. And a lot of this session is aimed at the different speakers, yes, but there is some value in it where we can take responsibility to communicate our outcomes and our objectives to our speakers. Because why is it that when we go to a restaurant, we go out to have breakfast, we are quite clear how we expect our eggs if we pay 100 Rand, 150 Rand? I want it medium. Why is it that we are clear if we order a steak? Medium rare or medium? But when it comes to the events where we spend thousands and in some cases millions, we aren't clear with our objectives. So hopefully throughout this session, we'll be able to provide you with a life jacket that will take you and protect you through this storm, this flood of data presentations. Because ladies and gentlemen, each and every single one of you has the ability to create moments of wonder, but it starts with taking responsibility over the objectives and the outcomes of your events to create that long-lasting change. So let's start with defining data. It's simply facts, figures, numbers, and or observations. And unfortunately, all the creatives among us go, data. We don't really want to deal with those things. And the irony is there's research evidence that suggests that a significant portion of the population struggles or actively dislikes stats. So there's data suggesting that we hate data. Yet we don't take it seriously. So let's quickly look at a piece of data. An annual investment of $267 billion is required to end world hunger. But strangely, if we save a quarter of the food that we waste, we could potentially end world hunger. You see, stats and data is fun. It can move us forward. However, it needs to be relevant. This is Margaret Hamilton. And here she is with the Apollo code. A lot of information that helped put people on the moon. And this is my summary. Now, I don't know about you, but that won't put anyone on the moon. Why? Because data is only valuable in the hands of the right people. But we find ourselves at events and at meetings, not trying to put data into their hands, but putting it into their eyeballs and eardrums. And honestly, sometimes those people just don't care. So we data dump these graphs and stats, and we play this mother-soothing singing lullaby, and we fall asleep before the next speaker yells, "Consider this!" In 2023, the world produced 64.2 zettabytes of data. That's 64.2 trillion gigabytes. And ladies and gentlemen, our brains are not wired to handle such big numbers. We don't know what it means. So if we don't know what it means, let's look at a smaller number, 21.6 million. Now, global cheese consumption is projected to reach a new record height of 21.6 million metric tons. And some of us will say, yo, go see. I need to get into the biz. I need to pivot. We need to First National Brie. We need to Nas Parmigiano. We need to Harmony Gouda. But we still don't know what 21.6 million metric tons actually means. That's 360 kilograms of cheese for every single South African. That's almost a kilogram of cheese per day. And my wife says there's no such thing as enough cheese. But in this case, she might not only be wrong, she could potentially also be stupid. I hope she's not watching this thing. But let's look at an even smaller number, 5.4 million. So there's an estimation that over the last 4.5 years, 5.4 million babies were born in South Africa. But we don't care. It's just a number. But if I tell you that what if 5.4 million babies were stillborn, suddenly that number has different weight to it. Suddenly it becomes scary. But if I tell you that people from the age of 5 to 24 that's currently not attending school has reached 5.4 million, we still don't pay attention. Now, ladies and gentlemen, 5.4 million is roughly the population, almost the population of Johannesburg. So if all of these people are unschooled, that means you're unschooled, I'm unschooled, your neighbor is unschooled, everybody is unschooled. But let's look at an even smaller number, daily calorie intake. And these are the kind of numbers that we think we understand. For females, 2,000 calories. For men, 2,500 calories. And who thinks it's a lot? But we don't actually know unless you calculate your calories every single day. Now, this is cheesecake, 321 calories. That means to consume the right amount of calories for me, I can almost eat 8 slices of cheesecake per day. Now, I do assume, depends how you cut it, that means I can almost eat an entire cheesecake, and that sounds like fun. But you remember that 360 kilograms of cheese I mentioned earlier? That's almost 4,000 calories. So the purpose of this story is if you want to live a healthier life, just make cheesecake. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Enrico, and I'm the CEO here at Multimedia based in South Africa. As mentioned, for the last 33 years, we've been assisting corporates to communicate their message and create meaningful connections. And that is what today is all about. But we as humans, we don't understand numbers. And without a way to interpret or communicate those numbers effectively to our audience, we do risk drowning them in it. Now, you and I have had our best daydreams at financial results events. We sit and it's numbers and numbers and numbers, and it's so boring. And so we start playing out these different scenarios in our minds. We think back to a fight we had with our partner or our spouse, and we think of different things that we should have said, and they become fact. And you win the fight in your brain, and you're like, ha, showed him. And you're thinking, how are you going to incorporate this 360 kilograms of cheese into your daily lives? And how are you going to protect your kid from becoming a statistic in South Africa? And what a strange phrase is that. You become a statistic in South Africa. You get mugged, and suddenly you're part of this very unique club of statistics, of people. And isn't it interesting that those things don't matter until you become a part of it? It's only through this emotional experience that we become and understand the numbers on screen. And that is what today is about. How do we make data, stats, and graphs important and relevant to the person in the venue, the person in the meeting room, the dude in the boardroom who's currently just worrying, what is he going to do with that additional 122 kilograms of cheese he inherited from his now late father? Let's look at some charts. And you thought I could not make that sound sexy. how society views sleeping. Hours of sleep over the time spent sleeping. So, sleeping between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. is a productive member of society. Sleeping between 2 a.m. and 10 a.m. is a lazy piece of human garbage. What people say when I try on my glasses, who here has glasses? You will feel this. I understand how glasses work. It's not my prescription. Things are going to be blurry, or, oh my God, these are so strong. You must be blind. Then a Zoom call timeline. Me talking a little bit of the time, them talking a lot of the time, but most of the time I am staring at my own stupid face. How kids are funny. In pink, we have things that kids do that are funny on purpose. And in purple, things that kids do that are funny because kids are stupid. And then how do I sleep? On my back, on my side, on my stomach, but mostly I just sleep poorly. Now you might say, haha, that's so me. You would have enjoyed it. You resonated with it. You might have said, haha, hashtag me too. I hope you did not say that. That would not be fitting. You see, in 2014, the hashtag why I stayed was used by people in abusive relationships to communicate their story, why they stayed in those relationships. And the Giorno Pizza went and they said, hashtag why I stayed. They had pizza. And obviously they experienced massive backlash. So why is it that some of the charts excite us and some hashtags make us angry? It's because of that emotional connection that we have with the story, that emotional connection that plays off in our own minds. It's not something that might be true. It's something that you reflect on and you're like, this is relevant to me. So, the Bible, some would say the greatest story ever told, written over 500 years in 3 languages and on 3 continents. And still, some people cannot find a place for a single story in their financial results presentations. And as it is written, thou shalt not be lazy. So over 100 million Bibles are sold every single year. That's one Bible for every 70 people on the planet. ABSA has 36,000 employees. So ABSA's salaries potentially funded 514 Bibles. Now, whenever you meet an ABSA employee, you will think, were they the one that bought the Bible? Now, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you've been realizing what I've been doing, but I've been breaking down the numbers. We don't understand these bigger numbers. We don't have an emotional connection to it. So it's our responsibility as event coordinators and speakers to figure out how do we take these numbers and make it relevant for the people in the seats. And that is done through context, emotion, and structure. Stories are how humans have communicated complex ideas for millennia. And it's only when we provide the right context are our audience able to create an emotional connection with that story, and through a memorable structure, they are able to remember it. And pure data lacks all of these things. Incorporating stories into our data-driven presentations makes the information more engaging and comprehensible. People can understand and they can remember. Now, ladies and gentlemen, step 2 is you need to invest in a vest. And some of you will say, dude, I don't want to spend money on anything. That's why I came to the stage dive. It's free. I want free value. Well, luckily for you, a vest is a vision that creates an emotional connection that's simple to understand, and it teaches us something. It is our responsibility to look at our data, our numbers, our graphs, and say, what story can I tell that people can create an emotional connection with? It needs to be simple to understand, and it needs to teach them something. So what do we usually do? When we put a graph on screen, I utilized the ugliest graph that I could find on Google. So what would people do? They would say, this is a graph. As you can see, this is a graph of the nicest fruit. And blueberries. People like blueberries, as you can see. People like blueberries. And apples. Apples are good, as well as oranges. They're good. They're nice fruits. That does not create any sort of connection with our audience. And a lot of times that is what we see on stage. As you can see, yes, we can see, but what's the context? What's the emotional connection? And what's the structure that will allow us to remember what you're trying to communicate? So how can we approach these things? Ladies and gentlemen, we surveyed a bunch of people to find out what is the nicest fruit. But we had some follow-up questions. We had to understand why people say it's the nicest fruit. So as you can all see here, blueberries is the preferred fruit. And when we ask people why, they said that it is because they can use it in their smoothies and because of its antioxidant capabilities. We're like, okay, cool. That's interesting. Now, with the other people, some would say they preferred apples. And we're like, why do you prefer apples? And they talked about fiber and they talked about antioxidant capabilities. But strangely enough, when we look at blueberries and people using it in smoothies, it kind of makes us wonder why bananas are rated so low. Because people often use bananas with peanut butter in their smoothies. But the strangest thing that came out of this entire graph was how people prefer fruit based on how health conscious they are. Healthier people prefer blueberries, where non-health conscious people prefer apples and oranges. And we also found out that the health conscious people earn higher salaries. So your fruit preference is directly influenced by the lifestyle you can afford. Suddenly, people will remember that rich people like blueberries and people who don't care about their health prefer apples and oranges. So this is a normal piece of data. On Friday, March 11, 2011, a 9.0 magnitude earthquake struck off the coast of Japan, resulting in a catastrophic tsunami. And that is how we communicate on stage when we need to share this information. But I'm going to read a quick thing for you, how the New York Times framed it. On Friday, 2:46 p.m. Tokyo time, the quake struck. First came the roar and the rumble and the timber, shaking skyscrapers and toppling furniture and buckling highways. Then waves as high as 30 feet came rushing onto shore, whisking away cars and carrying blazing buildings towards factories, fields, and highways. By Saturday morning, Japan was filled with scenes of desperation as stranded survivors called for help and rescuers searched for people buried in the rubble. Suddenly, that story has a lot more value than just the data that we put on screen. It's the way we show up and deliver the message. And to do this, we need to have a narrative arc. Now, there's something called the hero's journey, which is phenomenal, but it's an 8-step thing. And it's quite difficult to do when you have a short time frame to deliver your message. So when you're working with data stuff, ask yourself, how can I use a narrative arc? How can I create a setup? How can I create a conflict? And how can I create a resolution? And a resolution is not a beautiful ending. We miss the mark there. The resolution is where the loose ends are tied up. It shows the results of the decisions that were made. It leaves lasting impact and it drives home the main concept. But if you're having struggles with this word called conflict, change it to challenge. Because as human beings, we love novelty. We love new things. So how can we use that to trigger a certain thinking inside our audience so that they remember what happened? So how do we approach presentations? Usually we have some sort of diagram on screen. Someone once told us we need to use images. So we have all of that on screen and we tell people, as you can see in the turquoise blue, the seawall was built certain height, but the waves came over and flooded the Fukushima power plant, resulting in a nuclear disaster during this tsunami. But we actually don't care. But if we reflect back on that story of 30 feet of water, this is the kind of message that people will remember. It's still data. It's still information, but our brains are able to remember 14 to 15 meters of water washed into the Fukushima power plant. That is where we need to create our setup, our challenge, and our resolution. Because Daniel Priestley said it best, your brain deletes messages. If they're not scary, I added in sad. If they're not strange, if they're not sexy, if they don't provide free value, and free value is something that someone is willing to pay for, or if it's not familiar. So what do we do on stage during data presentations? We've worked with the data for months, years. It's familiar to us, but no one else in that venue actually understands it. So what do? We assume it's familiar to them, and they blank out. They go into daydream mode and they start thinking about fights with their spouse and their partner, cheese, and not becoming a statistic in SA. And when we look at these different things that drive emotion, we can reflect and say, that's why something like Schindler's List, Sophie's Choice, Boy in the Striped Pajamas, and The Pianist are some of the best movies to watch. See, their resolutions aren't just nice and beautiful. It's sad. It's painful, but it shows how it shows the results of the decisions that were made. It leaves long lasting impact, and it drives home the main concept. And through that, it does become relatable. And it's our responsibility as event organizers to ensure that the content on screen is relatable to the audience. Now, my charts at the start, stories of cheese and 4 depressing movies that make you ugly cry, we understand it. We do not understand the tsunami. We've never experienced a tsunami, but we do understand that a water level as high as 7 Enricus is a lot. Now, if there's one thing that you have to write down and you have to remember, it's data tells you what's happening and stories tell you why it matters. It's pointless just to share data. You have to tell people why that data matters so that they're able to remember it. Because studies show that stories activate more areas of the brain than data alone. And when we hear a story, our brain releases oxytocin, which enhances empathy and connection. It's an opportunity for us to strengthen our relationship with the individual in the chairs. Now, unfortunately, our brain does have a strong tendency to lose focus. It's estimated that we engage in up to 2,000 daydreams a day, and our brain spends half its waking time wandering. So if you sleep for 8 hours, right, that leaves 16 hours of waking time. Quick maths, easy come, easy go. That leaves 960 minutes of waking time. Not quick maths. I had to do that with a calculator. So that means we have 2 daydreams every single minute. So how are we supposed to get anything done with a brain like that? How are we supposed to have any sort of connection with a brain like that if we only focus on data dumping? Now, the worst thing in this entire situation is if you are currently captivated and you're enjoying this presentation, you're not using your daydreams. That means you could potentially have extras available after the session. So if this comes to an end and you are catatonic and stupid, I'm sorry, it was not my intention. Don't blame me. Don't tell your boss. It is my fault. Moving on. Stories create oxytocin and it enhances empathy, which makes stories a powerful tool for persuasion as well as retention. Now, I don't need to persuade you that Fukushima and the tsunami was a tragic experience. You can feel it. So let's go a little bit back in time. COVID-19 was caused due to an accidental leak from the Wuhan Institute of Technology, the leading institute for studying coronaviruses in Asia. And SARS-CoV-2 could have only been created in a lab. There's nothing that says that is true. Yet, some of us still believe it. Why? Because we have an emotional connection with COVID-19. We lived it. We were part of it. We experienced it. It's true because we made banana bread. Banana bread searches spiked with over 100% in 2022. 33% of people in the UK baked more bread during 2020 than previously in their lives. Dutch oven sales surged with over 200% for bread baking. So the moral of the story is COVID-19 was created by Le Creuset. And when we reflect back on that graph earlier, clearly, it was created by the banana trade. It's the only way for them to sell. Now, you might say, dude, I don't care about tsunamis. I don't care about daydreams. I don't care about bread. I want to know what I need to do to land my message. Well, start saving those daydreams as I quickly need you to focus. We have the data. Your speakers has the data. Your companies have data, but you need to take responsibility for firstly, how you share your data, and secondly, with who you share your data. Because as mentioned, data is only valuable in the hands of the right people. If we force data into certain events, our audience are going to disconnect. It's unavoidable. You are going to have an event where people say, wasn't fun, because that's on you. You made the choice to force something into a narrative where it does not belong. You need to know your audience. It's not about you and me. It's not about your CEO. It's not about your CFO. It's about the people in the seats, the euros in the story, the people that we're trying to create a meaningful connection with, and the people that we're trying to influence to create long lasting change. So focus on using that setup, that challenge, and that resolution. It's crucial to go in with that intention. Ask yourself, how can you provide context that creates an emotional connection? That is it fit into a structure that's easy to remember, that's memorable. So, ladies and gentlemen, I asked ChatGTP for a random stat, and this is something that it came up with. So I want to show you how I would approach it if I had to communicate this stat. So if you spent your entire life living a safe life, you've made good choices. You focused in school and got good grades. You were able to go to university and go and study a good, great degree. You're currently working. You're earning a fantastic salary. You're married to a loving and caring spouse. You have 2 kids. Every night you have a warm meal. You spend time watching TV together. Occasionally you go on holiday to the bush. Life is very safe and secure. And you're thinking, maybe we should get a dog, spice it up a little bit. Perhaps a Labrador. And perhaps we should call him Charlie. Now, with this stat on screen, you're starting to wonder, where is this bad thing gonna come in now? It's this perfect environment, this perfect setup, and clearly there's a conflict or a challenge that's gonna disrupt all of this. The funny thing is, for those of you that have gone through experiences in life around your mental well-being, anxiety, depression, when this stat popped up, you instantly connected with it. You instantly thought back to a moment in time where you were anxious, where you were depressed, because you have that emotional connection. But what if you don't know and your connection is linked to the story? And I suddenly drop this bomb. Your spouse, your partner has been diagnosed with Bell's palsy, and your lives are about to change. Suddenly you go, oh no, not Bell's palsy, even though we don't even know what Bell's palsy is. And if you do, clearly you are an intellectual. Ladies and gentlemen, it's important to focus on the setup, the challenge, and the resolution. I asked ChatGTP for another stat, which I'll reveal at a certain time. 24 October 1989, a boy was born in Gothenburg, Sweden, named Felix Arvid Ulf Schellberg. His mother was a chief information officer and his dad a corporate executive. He grew up in this rich corporate lifestyle. So he decided to go and study industrial engineering. Do what you know. But strangely enough, in April 2013, Felix was covered on the New York Times. On 15 August 2013, Felix received a certificate from the Guinness World Book of Records. On 25 August 2020, Felix reached 100 million subscribers on YouTube. In November of 2020, 10 years after Felix started his YouTube channel, he retired with a net worth of $45 million. Felix was the first big shootout YouTuber, and he started by studying industrial engineering. See, ladies and gentlemen, 85% of jobs that will exist in 2030 hasn't been invented yet. So, will you be the Felix, retire at 30 with $45 million, or will you just be another industrial engineer within the system? In 2022, we hosted one of the biggest live streams in Africa, more than 2 million viewers. And it was one of those ego projects. Everyone thought they were cooler than the audience. The audience's attention was not respected. It wasn't earned. It wasn't valued. No effort was put in to communicate information. No effort was put in to create context, create an emotional connection, and a structure that is memorable. And things went sideways. It became chaotic. And we sat back during that live stream and watched how this company's market cap dropped with R1 billion. Obviously, their competitors were celebrating. They were winning all the way through. And the strange thing is, nothing has changed since then. They still approach it in the exact same way. They still don't respect the audience. So what will happen if you are the one who thinks differently? What will happen if your business approaches things in a different way? Imagine the lasting impact if you were the one who decided to communicate your message clearly, with purpose, and in a way that creates an emotional connection and that's easy to understand and remember. If you provide context, create an emotional journey, and you follow structure, you can change lives. As we start wrapping up this session, I want to tell you about KFC Christmas in Japan. KFC isn't universally celebrated in Japan. Their Christian population is only 1% of the greater population. And the manager of the very first KFC overheard some foreigners complain and lament that they didn't have turkey for Christmas. So he thought to himself, what does a party barrel look like? So in 1974, this individual launched Kentucky for Christmas, focusing on that need, that challenge of the foreigners. He sold a story that you should celebrate Christmas like the Americans. And in result, 3.6 million families now order KFC buckets on Christmas. Through setup, conflict, and resolution, this man has not just influenced foreigners. He influenced a tradition in Japan. He changed his own people. 3.6 million families. How insane is that? You see, the possibilities are endless. Your potential is infinite. If you are willing to move away from this is the nicest fruit, as you can see, the nicest fruit, to wealthy people prefer different fruits. And for me, personally, even though people hated grapes, grapes will always be welcome alongside my 360 kilograms of cheese platter. Thank you very much for sitting in on the session. Let's embrace the power of story together in our data-driven presentations, and let's go out and change lives. Let's have a chat. For those of you who are viewing this recording, I'm going to end it right here. Thank you for spending time and watching it with us, while the rest of us have conversations. Thanks.